Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Good Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Okay, this afternoon, a few years back, sort of post-credit crunch, you may well remember, there was a lot of talk in the whisky industry about the demise of the independent bottling company. And there was all this doom and gloom, shall we say, about the whole situation. It was, distilleries weren't going to be selling their casks, independent bottling companies were going to find it harder and harder to find fillings, unless of course they had, a good sort of stockpile of their own. Brokers were going to go bust and all this kind of stuff. And well, as you know, the reality of the situation is quite considerably different. In actual fact, it seems to be no shortage of casks sloshing about on the secondary market, and instead of having independent bottling companies that are going to the wall, more of them seem to be appearing in actual fact. And as I may well have mentioned a couple of weeks ago, I was contacted by a couple of new ones, or relatively new ones, certainly new ones to me anyway, that kindly send me some samples. And so I thought, well, we're going to look at them, and today we're looking at a range of whiskies bottled by a company called, and I'm probably going to pronounce this horribly wrong, Gleann Mor Whiskies. Now, they originally contacted me, or Derek, the owner or director of the company, which was set up in 2013, contacted me more to do with their Firkin gin, which I had read about in actual fact, briefly, shall we say, in passing. And I kind of did a bit of research and discovered that they obviously did their own range of whiskies. So I said to Derek, yeah, great, send me samples. Send me some samples of your whiskies as well. So he kindly did, which was very kind of him. And I tasted them, and because it was pretty much, I think, around about the sort of year end in April, and I wasn't really buying anything. I didn't really do anything with regards to it. I kind of put it on the back burner, and once we got the kind of year end out of the way and all the stock taking and all that kind of business, I thought, right, well, let's get some of their stuff in. And lo and behold, all the stuff he'd sent me in samples was all sold, so, well, obviously he's doing something all right then, I thought. So I kind of said, well, would you mind sending me some more samples, as you do. And he kindly sent me some more samples, which I thought was really nice. But as you know, not all independent bottling companies are so generous, shall we say. But so I thought it's probably long overdue an episode of the show, and although I'm not doing the Firkin gin today, and it's a really interesting oak aged gin made in small batches, aged in, or rested as the case may be, in different casks, different distilleries casks, I should say. But hopefully, sometime down the line, once I've got rid of a few more episodes of the show that I've got lined up, I'll probably include them. But as for today, we're looking at their range of whiskies called A Rare Find. Now, like I said, I don't know a huge amount about the company, apart from it was founded in 2013, so it's been going for about 4 years now. I'm guessing it's like a lot of the new independent bottling companies. They probably don't have a huge sort of like stockpile, shall we say, unlike certain other ones that have been around since probably since the 1800s or whatever. So they're obviously buying on the secondary market, and it just goes to show that the secondary market is still pretty buoyant in actual fact. So not really a great deal much more to say, I suppose. So let's take a look at today's hopefully interesting lineup.
Please don't forget.
Right, okay, so the first bottling we're going to kick off with is an Inchgower. Now, Inchgower is quite interesting, and I just haven't seen very much of it about of recent, it has to be said. It's one of those distilleries that can be, what's the best way of putting it? Probably a little bit bland, shall we say? A bit simple. Sometimes it can be quite pleasant. You know, very sort of crisp and fresh and all that kind of thing. So we'll see which one this is. This was distilled in 2008, bottled last year. It's obviously 8 years old and was bottled at 60.2%. So a bit of alcohol in there. Hence the water jug, which I remembered this time. The second bottling we'll be looking at is a 9-year-old from the North Highland. Now, obviously, the distillery that where this was distilled has obviously not allowed them to use their name. I know where it comes from, and I'm not sure whether I'm supposed to say or not, but what I can say is that the water source for this particular distillery is the Laphroaig spring. So have a look, do your homework, and you'll figure out where it comes from. So this was distilled in 2007. It was aged in refill port, which could be interesting, and there's another clue to think of a Highland distillery that tends to use a fair bit of port, and was bottled at 53.2%, bottled again last year. The third sample we're looking at again is another refill port matured whisky, which again will be interesting to see what the difference is between these two. This is a Benrinnes. It was distilled in 1995. It's 18 years old now. By my maths, if it was distilled in 1995, it was bottled in 2013. Yet it's on their current list. So maybe it was bottled 4 years ago and just hasn't been released as yet. I mean, that's not unheard of, although it would have probably gone back to the early days of their business, which does make it a bit odd, because you would have thought early days you'd be bottling pretty much what you can get your hands on to start off with. But anyway, that is what it is. It is an 18-year-old Benrinnes. So. And we're going to move on to 3 samples, which, as you can see from the different shape of bottle, these were the original samples and are now no longer available, unfortunately. So if you like the sound of them, sorry, but I can't sell them to you. The first one is a 40-year-old blended malt. This was distilled in 1975 and is bottled at 47.1%. It is a vatting of Tamdhu, Glenroth and Highland Park, all aged in refill sherry, so could be interesting. The next bottling we'll be looking at is a grain. This is a 1964 distilled Carsebridge, which was bottled in May of 2016. Actually, know the dates of this is the only one I know the dates of, and I know what the cask number was. It's a refill sherry butt 89160. So distilled in January of 1964, bottled in May of 2016 at again 47.1%. So as you know, I like my old grain whisky, so hopefully that will be quite good. And finally, we're going to do the Isla. This is a Laphroaig, bottled at 53%. Now, distilled in 2004. I'm guessing bottled in 2016, making it a 12-year-old, but I'm not entirely sure. So it's a bit of a guess on that one. But I think I'm right in saying that this is a 12-year-old Laphroaig. So hopefully, should be a nice way of finishing this sort of tasting off. So there you go, that's today's lineup. Let's kick off with the Inchgower then.
I don't know who I am.
Okay, so let's see what the nose gives us then, shall we? For something of 60 odd percent, the alcohol is actually quite nicely contained. It's slightly malty. There's a little bit of almost rye-like herbs, fresh white fruit, apricot. It's quite an appealing nose in actual fact. I quite like this. It's like I said, it's nice and fresh. It's aromatic. There's a little bit of honey, and I'm just now starting to get a little bit of creamy oak really creamy oak coming through. With a sort of a light toffee note. So I think for a sort of for an 8-year-old whisky, yeah, I think this is a very appealing nose. There's a smidge of citrus coming through now. And although, like I said, I mean, there is a lot going on. It's not majorly complex. But I think for an 8-year-old, like I said, I think this is just a very appealing nose. And for 60-odd%, it really doesn't smell like it. I would be expecting, you know, a lot more alcohol on the nose. But let's see what the palate gives us then, shall we? Obviously the alcohol is a little more noticeable on the palate. It is kind of masking the finish, but it's still really well integrated. It's quite full. It's a bit simple. It's barley, there's a little bit of apricot, touch of oak. I get the feeling that putting a little bit of water with this is probably going to bring the oak out a little bit. There's a nice kind of subtle toffee note to the oak. And again, yeah, that's really quite pleasant. Let's put a little drop of water with it and see what happens. See what that's done to the nose now. It's brought out a little bit of sugar. There's a touch more barley. Softened it. It's quite rounded now. And the oak is a little bit more noticeable, but to be honest with you, apart from adding that little bit of sort of almost granulated sugar note, it really hasn't changed the nose a huge amount. So let's see what the palate's like. Lengthened. It has brought out the oak a little bit more, certainly on the finish. I'm certainly getting some of that lovely creamy toffee notes. It's possibly emphasised the citrus a little bit more as well. It's still relatively full. It's relatively straightforward, but I think what it does in pleasant ways. So I have decided that I will stock this particular one. I forget what I've worked out the price to be, but it will be up on the website at some stage when I actually receive the stock, shall we say. But yeah, I think that's a really appealing whisky. I like that. It's unpretentious and just really nice. Right, okay, so let's move on to the North Highland 9-year-old. Let's see what those gives us on this then, shall we? That's interesting. Knowing the distillery it comes from, knowing that they do release a port matured bottling, which is which is lovely, I have to say, and it's very soft and it's very polished. This has got a little bit more of a rough edge, which I really like, and I guess that's what I like about my wood finishes. Yes, they're really appealing when they're very polished and classy and all that, but when they've got that sort of slightly rougher, earthier kind of edge to them, that's what I quite like. So there's some dried fruits, there's some red and black fruit, a little bit of herbalness as well. But underneath that I'm getting some barley, I'm getting a little bit of granity kind of Highland character coming through, and I think this is just really well balanced. Yes, it's young, yes, it's quite malty, and it is a bit edgy and earthy, and not primary is the wrong word, but youthful, if you see what I mean. But I think this is really appealing, and like I said, when you know what the distillery is, you just go, oh, that's a bit different to what you'd normally expect from them. So like I said, I mean, this is bottled at 53.2%, which certainly, again, I don't think is sort of overly alcoholic. It certainly doesn't come through too much on the nose. Again, it's all well integrated, shall we say. So let's see what the palate gives us. That's got some nice intensity on the finish. Oh, mouth-watering now as well. So it's quite juicy. It's quite. It's more port character on the palate. It certainly sort of opens up with that sort of syrup-coated red cherry and raspberry fruit. But that finish is lovely. It's got a little bit of dark chocolate, a bit of tight tannin. Like I said, it's got that sort of slightly rough, kind of natural, earthy edge to it, which is, you know, as far away from the polished distillery bottling as you can possibly get. Quite mouth-watering. It's lovely length. I mean, I'm really that dark chocolate, that sort of pure sort of 90-odd% cocoa dark chocolate kind of notes are really lingering. Yeah, okay, you're not getting a huge amount of the distillery character. Certainly the sort of barley notes and what have you that were noticeable on the nose are not really there on the palate. It is more about the port, shall we say, on the palate. But it's got a lovely intensity, nice spiciness, and if you love wine finished whiskies, yeah, I like that. I think that's a really nice whiskey. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Benrinnes. Let's see what nose gives us on this then, shall we? A lot more subtler on the port, less of that sort of winey red fruit. There's just a little hint of red fruit in the background, and certainly more emphasis on the spirit. There's a little bit of almost kind of dusty, mature oak kind of coming through, touch of honey and barley. I mean, again, Benrinnes is one of these sort of hit and miss kind of whiskies, but this is absolutely fantastic. I mean, I'm really getting loads and loads of dusty oak. I mean, it smells a lot older than its 18 years. I mean, it smells more like its mid-20s, and if it was, I mean, if it was bottled sort of this year, then that would make it sort of 20, or last year I should say, that would make it 21. I'm just going to have to wait until I physically get my hands on the bottle to see whether this is actually 18 years old. Well, I mean, that's what's written on the sample bottle, or whether it's actually 21. Because it certainly smells a lot older than 18. In actual fact, it's absolutely gorgeous. It really is, and the port notes are just so subtle. They're just sitting in the background. Like I say, just adding that little bit of wininess. Oh, that is a lovely nose. I really like this. Let's see what the palate gives us. Subtle, juicy, long, lovely spicy note on the finish. The port is kind of more coming through on the finish, so it kind of kicks off with that almost kind of what says to me dusty American oak, and maybe this is a refilled bourbon hoggy, you know, hoggy that was then filled with port, possibly. I mean, the thing is, with regards to sort of ex-wine casks, it's not necessarily all of them are going to come from Portugal or wherever. They may well have been sort of stored in a distillery in Scotland and then had, you know, port or sherry or what have you decanted into it. I mean, it's certainly not unknown. I mean, for example, I mean the English whiskey company, as you probably well know, tends to season its own sherry casks. So you have, you know, American oak barrels or hoggies which have been seasoned with sherry, and they tend to have a slightly different character to European oak. Obviously, it's been seasoned with sherry or whatever. So this kind of feels like an ex-American oak cask. Dusty oak, lovely mature honey, barley, apricot, and then on the finish in comes the port notes. Again, slightly dusty, lightly chocolatey tannins, but really soft, really subtle, but quite spicy in actual fact. I think that's got a lovely finish to it. I think a lovely progression, lovely finish. That's just what I look for in a whiskey. So again, hats off, but whether it's 18 or 21, who knows, it's still a bloody good whiskey as far as I can say. Okay, so let's move on to the no longer available bottlings. Let's see what the blended malt gives us on the nose. Lots of sherry, lots of mature sherry, sort of Armagnac-y sort of character. Getting quite a lot of the Highland Park. I'm getting a lot of that sort of slightly coastally, slightly peated, dusty peat kind of notes. I mean, I'm guessing. I mean, realistically, the sort of the Tamdhu and the Glenrothes are going to kind of sort of meld into one to a certain extent, but it's got a lovely sort of depth to it, wonderful maturity. I mean, again, as I've probably said on numerous occasions, sherry matured whiskies are not my big thing, but once they have some serious age and you're getting the oxidation, you're getting the wood notes, you know, where you lack the distillery character when they're young, you're certainly making up for it in maturation character. And this is absolutely stunning. Like I said, loads of sort of almost pruny raisin fruit, a little bit of smoke, a touch of violet. Almost feels like there's well, I know there isn't any Bamor in there, but you know, there's that slightly Bamor-y edge, which is obviously the Highland Park influence. Oh, that is absolutely gorgeous. There's a little bit of rubber coming through now, a touch of peat, even some oak vanillins as well, which is quite a surprise. Oh, absolutely fantastic. Really, very, very good. Let's see what the palate gives us then, shall we? Yeah, so it kind of kicks off with sort of, obviously the sherry dried fruits, almost macerated orange. Then you're getting sort of a little bit of dusty peat kind of coming through, and which kind of lingers into sort of a little bit of tar, a little bit of dark chocolate, a little bit of coal smoke. It's got a lovely vibrancy. The sort of alcohol is kind of just nipping at the edges of the tongue, and it's just giving it that kind of vibrancy to offset all that mature dried sherry fruit, the raisins, the prunes, the sultanas. Fantastic finish. I mean, the alcohol and citrus kind of builds, and it really finishes wonderfully fresh. And really dusty, really peaty, although, you know, in that mature kind of peat kind of character. That is stunningly good. There is no doubt about that. And whether that was actually vatted together by the company itself, I don't know. I imagine it was probably purchased as almost as a pre-blended cask on its own, I would imagine. But even so, the balance of that is just absolutely fantastic. That's really good, or was really good, as the case may be. Right, let's move on to the Carsebridge. Actually, I think I mentioned the ABV incorrectly. The ABV is 40.8, not 47.1. That's the same ABV as the blended malt. So apologies for that. I think I just got that wrong. But anyway, let's see what the nose gives us then, shall we? Quite rummy in actual fact. High toned, dried fruits, dried apricot, apple, really sort of juicy and full. There's some lovely mature vanilla oak beneath, plenty of coconut kind of coming through now. Still got a lovely vibrancy even though it's 52 years old, but you know, that's not a surprise. I mean, as you well know, sort of grain whiskey will just keep aging and aging and aging, and it's not overly oaked. There's still some lovely grain spirit character. There's the dried fruits. Loads of coconut. Oh, that is a lovely nose, really, really nice. And this is the nice thing about grain whisky, it is different to malt whisky, and there is no doubt about it. And like I said, if you've still not had a good grain whisky, then I suggest you give one a try, because they are absolutely fantastic. And like I said, sometimes they go in like this, in this instance slightly rummy, sometimes they become quite sort of cognac-y, armagnac-y, with that sort of heavy oxidised rancio. But this is wonderfully light and fresh and mature. Oh, superb stuff. Let's see what the palate gives us. Quite a bit more oak on the palate there. Sort of succulent, soft vanilla, a little bit of coconut again. Wonderfully long. Some gentle spice. More of that sort of almost rummy, kind of cognac-y kind of character. It doesn't have buckets of oxidation character, which is a bit of a surprise for this kind of age. And the fact that it was also matured, and I suppose probably more so because it was matured in an ex-refill sherry cask, and I'm guessing this was a European oak sherry cask, slightly tighter grains. But even so, I'd expected a little bit more oxidation character, but it's so gentle, and sort of there's a little bit of spice there, a really very, very subtle sort of note from the cask, but again really quite coconutty. That is a lovely old grain, and it's just got so much life still in it. It's just wonderful. Right, and finally let's have a bit of peat then, shall we? So let's see what the Laphroaig gives us then. Crisp, fresh, vibrant, iodine, medicinal menthol peat. Classically fresh Laphroaig. It's not the sort of sweeter barley-led kind of Laphroaig that I've often come across. This is sort of definitely more of that sort of stinky kind of manure-y, crisp, fresh old Colila kind of like style. I mean, it does have some barley character underneath, and I mean it's not totally one-dimensional. There is some sort of barley character, and there's a touch of oak. It's certainly becoming a little bit more weighty as you give it time in the glass. There's almost a kind of tequila-like pepperiness kind of coming through as well. And it's certainly having maybe it's just my imagination, but sort of a kind of pulped fruit kind of feeling, shall we say. But it's certainly changing in the glass, giving it some air. It's now moving from that kind of crisper, fresher style to a slightly more sort of rounded and sort of fruity kind of character. Yeah, that's intriguing, and that's the wonderful thing about. I mean, I'm not saying that all single casks are like that, but more often than not, single cask whiskies can be just really intriguing. You're just getting all these different elements, and I'm even getting a little bit of burnt coffee, possibly. Let's see what the palate gives us then, shall we? Yeah, a bit more oak on the palate, certainly up front. kind of saltiness is starting to come through on the mid palate, really carries through onto the finish. Quite subtly peated. That sort of peat is quite almost violety, sort of quite dusty right on the finish. It's the saltiness that really gets you on the finish. It's really quite drying and salty, and there's a bit of iodine, but it's still up front quite fruity, you know, the sort of fruit and the oak, and a bit of barley as well. So yeah, that's got some really nice progression, and it's kind of has a nice fullness to it, but like I said, finish is really crisp and fresh and really, really salty. That's a lovely dram to finish with, I think. Right, okay, so let's wrap today up. Right, so Inchgower, yep, that's really good. Gets my seal of approval, and I have indeed bought some, so we will have that in stock in due course. Yeah, quite rich, full, takes water quite pleasant, doesn't really need it. I mean, I suppose it depends whether you kind of like one of these people who wants a bit more on the finish. If so, put a little drop of water with it and you get a little bit more on the finish. But as far as I can see, for me anyway, it certainly doesn't really need it. North Highland 9-year-old, yeah, I like this. This is good. Like I said, when you know what distillery it kind of comes from, it just kind of really interesting to see that this is not quite the sort of style that the distillery would tend to put out, and maybe it's just one of those kind of things. Maybe, you know, they get casks like this, but when they sort of vat them all together, of course, they become slightly more homogeneous, and so any kind of rough edged casks will kind of like just get kind of like lost in the vatting, so to speak. So quality absolutely spot on, and again, you know, we will have that in stock shortly. Similar to the Benrinnes. Like I said, really wonderfully mature, seems a lot older than it's 18. The port is quite subtle, just adding a little bit of red winey fruit and a little bit of spice. All just really, really balanced and very, very nice. So look out for those three on the website in due course. Like I said, 40-year-old blend, yeah, lovely old sherry matured whiskey, and not much more you can say about that. Like I said, the Highland Park certainly seems to sort of be quite noticeable in that blend, which is not a bad thing, I suppose, because old Highland Park can be pretty impressive, as is that particular whiskey. The Carsebridge, again, you know, wonderful whiskey. Really, really like old grain whiskey. Like I said, not quite as much oxidation as one would expect from something of that kind of age, but still absolutely loads and loads of character. And the Laphroaig, well, yeah, that was just a good Laphroaig. I mean, you know, a little bit sort of more oak influence than sometimes you can get with Laphroaig. Kind of started off, you know, crisper and fresher, but given time in the glass, like I said, it seemed to sort of round out a little bit more oak character, a little bit more barley. Not sweet as some independent bottlings of Laphroaig, and maybe not quite as heavily peated, sort of medicinal as some I've tasted. So, but still a really, really good whiskey. So there you go. That's this week's episode of the show in the bag. This is the range that's called A Rare Find by Gleann Mor Whiskies. Hope you'll be intrigued enough to kind of look into their whiskies. Like I said, I've certainly put my hand in work's pocket, shall I say, to put some on the shelf. So yeah, if these tick your box, then please buy one. So anyway, that's all that's left to say today is good dramming and good afternoon.